I speculated whether you were sick of me and you just were like, nah, I'll come back on Wednesday. We welcome in the creator of the Kings Beat and our 1320 Kings Insider, our good friend, James Ham. What's happening, Hammer?
Hey, we said 3 o'clock, right?
No, yeah, no, I just thought you might be, like over it. Like, no, I'll see you Wednesday. I don't need to see you at 3.
Oh no, I would have been here all day if it was just you flying solo.
Oh, I thought, well, let me ride here a little bit, give James Ham a chance to get back on schedule, so all of the listeners of the Kings Beat won't be angry with me anymore, and you can get your podcast out. We're talking like Monte McNair. Jesse posed the question a few minutes ago. Do you think the Sacramento Kings are waiting to see the results of this offseason before they extend any sort of extension to Monte McNair?
It's a great question. I mean, I've checked in numerous times, and to my knowledge, there has not been any communication between the Kings and Monte McNair's people when it comes to an extension. And I mean, that was as of like late last week. It's a dangerous game to play. You know, I talk about this all the time. You need to walk into this season. It needs to be about winning. It needs to be about basketball. It needs to be about not having distractions. And I don't think this is going to be a massive distraction because that's just not who Monte McNair is. He's so low key. But at the same time, it's going to be a topic of discussion, especially if this team gets off to a good start. And I know for everyone out there who's like, well, you know, prove it. Well, what if he does prove it and then he doesn't want to come back because you didn't extend him and someone else is willing to give him a big time offer to come run their team because he just did the impossible and turned around the Sacramento Kings? That seems like a bit of a risk if you're the Kings. And you're allowing someone at this point to make all kinds of decisions that are long-term decisions, and he's not under contract. So, you know, yes, I do believe we've come to a point where they need to do something, but you know.
But that's kind of why I feel like this is all going to get worked out. Is like no one's making short-term decisions. Like everything Monte has done has been a very clear, this is, you know, I even just laid out, you know, punting on the first season, everything he did off season and what he did in the second off season and how it kind of all built to his rapid movement this off season, including Mike Brown, the drafting of Keegan Murray, the signing of Malik Monk, the trading of Kevin Huerter, or the trading for Kevin Huerter, I should say. And it's all set up to where, man, it's hard for me to believe he doesn't see his future here. And you ask, you know, you say, you know, what, you know, he could, you know, put this team in a great position, and then another team comes in with a big offer to come run their franchise. Well, Vivek has to respond with that, like, okay, here's a bigger offer to stay here. Like it's the very epitome of you're taking a gamble by not signing this contract now, or you're taking a gamble by not offering this contract now when the price could skyrocket in 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, this Sacramento Kings franchise is usually pretty reactive, not proactive. So, I mean, that's a problem. And it's always been a problem. You know, they've lost, even this offseason, they've lost people inside the walls because they had to go out and get other jobs because they weren't sure about what was happening here. And then it's like, oh, wait, we'll pay you that, or we'll give you a bump. And it's like, no, it's too late. I already took another job. You know, in the NBA, that's kind of how it goes. Rarely do you see a Kenny Atkinson type move where somebody takes a job and then pulls it back. Even for much smaller jobs than a head coaching job, once somebody extends an offer and you say yes, your word is your bond, and you don't want to burn bridges around the league. And so most people follow through and take the job that they said yes to.
I was thinking back to that clip that we played on Friday that Trista tagged us in with the betting guy talking about taking the under on the Kings 32.5 and watching him feverishly try to study what the Sacramento Kings did this offseason. And I've come to the acceptance of this organization is just weighed down by its failures of the past. Like, I don't know how you can look at what Monte McNair did this offseason and thus what the Sacramento Kings have done this offseason and be super down on it. Like, this isn't Miami. This isn't the Los Angeles Lakers. Like, this is a team that kind of has been pulling it, is attempting to pull itself out of the gutter and has to, there's a certain level of guys that you can go after. And they went after a higher tier guy at the trade deadline in acquiring Domantas Sabonis. And then you pulled in, the Kevin Huerter and Malik Monk moves. And I just couldn't help but think you're weighing 16 years of failure versus the last month and a half of an off, instead of weighing the last month and a half of an off season.
Yeah, I mean, there's some balance between, again, I'm a history guy, so those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. We just see this again and again and again. It's a lot though. Like the momentum to be better, to snap the losing streak, all that stuff. It's there. I mean, everyone feels it around the organization. Clearly, that's what they would like to do. When it comes to somebody out there who makes a video and says, like, look, I think they're going to win less than 33 games. I mean, in all honesty, it's probably the safest bet because they've only done it twice in the last 14 years. Beat that bet. Mm-hmm. And so that does make it more difficult. But, I don't know. Like, at some point, as a fan, as somebody who bets, as someone who, talks about basketball in general, you have to take a step back and analyze what's happening right now. I do think that giving Monte McNair, his playoff, streak of futility is 2 seasons. And sure, he's wrapped up into 16, but it's only 2. Mm-hmm. And you kind of want to see how it plays out. Like, is it just me, or is this like, is it a movie that's given you enough over the last 2 years to like make you want to stay for the end and see how it finishes? Because it could finish well. And mm-hmm. that's kind of where I'm at with these guys. I'd like to see Monty have more security. Maybe he doesn't want it. We've always talked about that. There's always a possibility that he's like, it's okay. Go ahead and don't do that. And don't extend me an offer. Because the offer could be one of 2 things. It could be not good enough, not long enough, or not enough money. We haven't even got to that point. You could walk into the season, as of right now, there is no conversation. What if the conversation was a negative conversation? And that's a whole different ballgame. That's something we haven't got to yet.
Do you make anything of Sacramento being thrown into Sham's report about teams that have contacted Utah about Donovan Mitchell?
I mean, they're always going to be mentioned every time someone's available. And if the Kings didn't contact Utah about Donovan Mitchell, they'd be crazy. I mean, Donovan Mitchell's a really good player. You have to be cautious there, and what's it going to cost you? So, would you give up, De'Aaron Fox? Would you give up multiple first-round picks that you don't have at this point to give up? I think you can probably make an offer that didn't include Fox, and you could work something out with Atlanta and get access to your first-round picks back, and then make an offer that includes multiple first-round picks. But you're competing against a Knicks team that has has 8 picks in a war chest. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult to make a swing for the fence move for a guy like Donovan. I don't blame the Kings for kicking the tires. That's what they said they would do. They said it the whole time. Yeah.
You should ask, even if it's, hey, what's the deal with Donovan? Oh, here's what we're looking at. Yeah, cool. What about Bojan? What about Mike Conley? Like it could be lumped in like that quick. Like that could be the extent of the conversation, but that's not how it gets relayed to reporters, and that's not how it gets out there.
Yeah, that, and Utah's done a good job of acquiring like a group of players that are either on short-term deals or could help you push something over the top. Like Bojan is one thing. And unfortunately for Bojan, his contract is high enough. It's a 1-year deal. He's 33. You run the risk of him getting here and not being willing to like sort of play by the rules, to do what like 90% of all free agents or aging veteran signings have done in Sacramento, and that is not play up to any standard that they have in the past. But there are other players on that list that, I don't know. Vanderbilt is a nice young player. I would look at guys like Pat Bev. That guy hasn't missed the playoffs in a long time, and that's
Mhm.
because he's good and he's got a personality and he's a leader. Would he fit with the current roster? It'd be difficult, but that doesn't mean it would be impossible. So, I think that Utah is ripe for the pickings when it comes to not just, uh, when it comes to Donovan, but with the rest of their team. You're looking there and you're like, okay, they're ready to blow this thing up. It looks like, and could you get in there and find a player that makes a lot of sense?
I don't know where Donovan Mitchell's landing spot is that makes sense. So I mean, the only place from an acquiring team's perspective, I feel like Miami makes sense. Miami makes sense for either Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant because I think that you pay a massive, massive price to become a championship team that separates yourself a little bit from a really, really talented Eastern Conference. That's not the case with the Knicks. Like Donovan Mitchell goes to the Knicks, and it's like I don't know that Donovan Mitchell going to the Knicks makes the Knicks as good as Boston, Miami, Philly, or Milwaukee. So you're paying all that. You have $300 million players to be a fifth seed.
I understand your thinking, but at the same time, like it's kind of like the Sabonis move. Like you make the Sabonis move, and people are like, oh, it's a win now move. But win now didn't mean the final 28 games of the season. Win now meant the next 2 to 3 years. That's not what that was. It wasn't like a race to the play-in game, and that's all the Kings were in it for. They wanted Sabonis because he's under contract for 2 more years at like a super budget deal, and then they would like him longer than that. That was a deal that starts the ball rolling on other deals. It's a deal that if you go get Donovan Mitchell, it becomes much easier to go acquire the next piece because now you have other players that you can move and figure out like who's going to fit properly with him and with some of your core, but your core changes really quickly in that situation. Is RJ Barrett a perfect fit long term? Maybe not, but he's talented enough that he could get you something really good. And so it's a move that brings on another move that brings on another move. And so I do get, like, if the Knicks were to jump on board, that doesn't mean it's the only deal they do. They still
Mm.
have a bunch of picks, but on top of that, they still have other players. Would somebody take Julius Randle, and could you mix it up and get a better fit player than Randle, and maybe put yourself in the conversation to be better? So I think it's always, you got to look at the short term situation, but also the long term situation. I think short term, we're looking at Miami is clinging to something and hopes that they can put a team around Jimmy Butler for the next couple of seasons. They did it last offseason with Kyle Lowry, and now you're kind of at that situation where Boston is a team that looks at ahead and goes, okay, could we win 3 championships, 4 championships in the next 5 years? Maybe they can. Malcolm Brogdon is a big time get for a team that made it to the Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah.
That's tremendous. And if they go out and become movers and shakers on the Kevin Durant front, sure, you're giving up the star potential of Jaylen Brown and a one time All Star, but you're also taking back, a top 10 player all time who still has 4 years left on a contract and a couple of rings in the right situation.
Yeah, that's the wild component. Like the Jalen Brown, I think what was it, Derek White picks. That's a that's a hell of a deal for Boston. Obviously, Brooklyn feels different. Like that's that scenario where you're talking about where Boston's potentially looking at a title window of two, 3, 4 opportunities to win a championship. Whereas Brooklyn's alleged counter, including Marcus Smart and like another rotational player, is like that boxes Boston out. That almost puts Boston where they are right now.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, losing two really good players, including what the defensive player of the year and like a big time rising star in Brown. You know, if it were just Brown, I mean, I put Brown kind of in the same category that I put Donovan Mitchell. I might even think
Hmm.
higher of Donovan in certain situations than I do Brown. But I don't know. like all of this is some major gamble for everybody. The one thing we know is that Boston likes to gamble. They like to gamble to go for the rings, and they're one of the few teams out there that really will do that. That will put it all on the line and say, "Look, if it equates to another ring, then we won. Even if it's a one-time deal and it just happens one time, still, I mean, when was the last time the Sacramento Kings won a ring? Like 1950, 1951,
That wasn't
52?
Sacramento. Yeah.
No, well, yeah, you're right. It wasn't. It wasn't Sacramento, but I mean that 37 years they haven't won anything.
Right.
So I mean, I get your point, but 37 years they haven't won anything, and Boston's won a few. So it's about winning the chips, and I get it. I get why they would jump in and make a move for him. But if I'm the Kings, I'm not looking at a Donovan Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox swap. I don't like that, and that's kind of counter to what the Jazz are doing, anyways.
Yeah. How
So
how big of a difference do you think there is between De'Aaron and Donovan?
I don't think it's huge.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I don't think it's huge. I mean, like there used to be a point where Donovan was a better defensive player than De'Aaron Fox, but then that just wasn't the case in the playoffs. So like you kind of watch Donovan Mitchell fall apart. I still think overall he's a better defensive player. Coming into the league, he was a better defensive player than Fox. But man, it's tough. I mean, that's a high volume, high flying. That could be a really fun backcourt. And I know some people go, "Oh, that won't work at all." Roll the dice. I'd roll the dice on that if you can get it done. I just don't know how you get it done. I mean, just like what would it be? It would be Barnes. It would be Mitchell.
yep.
It would be
Terrence Davis.
Terrence.
That matches the money, and then you
Yeah.
have to fulfill their need for draft picks. Which actually that brings up a question that I asked you when you weren't here about an hour ago. You had said, and this was before the deal was final. You had talked about the protections on the as part of the Kevin Herter trade, and that the Kings can always call Atlanta and rework that. Now that the deal is final, is that still a call that can be made, or was that only in that like window in which the deal was announced, but it wasn't final for 3-4 days or whatever it was?
No, you can always negotiate the terms of things like that.
So they
You
could
can-
call today.
Yeah, you could call today, and maybe you got to give something else up. But like, if you call Atlanta and say, "Hey, we want to go back and get into that deal," and instead of a 2024, which is what, top 14, and then it drops to 2005 at 25 is top 12, and then drops to top 10. You say, "Hey, we'll just pull the protections off, but we want to give you the 2025." There's no way Atlanta's not going to say yes. There's no way. I mean, Atlanta would say yes any day of the week. I mean, if you're the Kings, you'd probably even say, "Hey, how about we give you a second round pick and throw in a player on an expiring deal and try to get something else out of Atlanta in order to pull that pick, the pick guarantees." But you can go back and negotiate picks. That's one of those weird things. And if I'm the Kings, like, I would consider it. I mean, maybe they left that door open when they made the original deal with Atlanta, but it really does. You've tied up not just your 2023, 24, 25, 26, but also your 27 first round picks. So the only thing you could offer right now is a 28 first round pick, because you can only go out 7 years. So you can't, or you could do the 28 or the 29. So if you were the Kings and you went back and said, "Hey, how about we pull the protections off the pick and we just give you the 2025," then you could offer up like the 23, 27, and 29 to Utah. And I don't know if that gets it done or not, because you're talking about a Knicks team that has, again, they have a war chest. They have 8 picks, but I'll always make
And
the
that's
same.
that's 8 picks within what, like the next 3 drafts?
They can offer up to 8 picks from what I know.
Okay. Yeah, they
Yeah.
have a ton. I think Kenny's. They have 3 picks just next year alone, and I think 2 the following year. So they've got a.
Yeah, but not all those picks are great. I mean, you have to go back and look
Sure.
exactly what each of those picks are. I know they have like a top 10 protected Dallas Mavericks pick. That's one of those picks. So it's not a great pick. And if you give them Donovan Mitchell and you don't hurt them in that transaction, how much better are the Knicks going to be? They're going to be pretty solid. You know, they could be a 3 seed, they could be a 4 seed in the East, and then that pick could be like a 22nd, 23rd pick. So I'm like, I've said this so many times. I would always, if I'm looking at any team in the league and I want to make a trade, I would always look at the Kings picks first. If they're available, they're some of the most valuable picks there are because the Kings are always in the lottery. Always. I mean, the last 16 years, they've been in the lottery. So it's like if you're a betting man, that's the team you'd want to trade with. The team that always figures out a way to botch something and end up right back in the same position. Could that change this time around? Sure, it could. But if I'm banking on something, I'd always, it's like Wesley Snipes, always bet on black. No, I'd always bet on the Kings. If I'm talking about getting draft picks, but pretty clear passenger 57 moment right here. Pretty clear.
That's solid. And the not often referenced passenger 57. That's good stuff right there, James. You are a movie buff indeed. As much as people turn their nose up at it, the deal that I feel like makes complete sense is the Rudy Gobert deal. I feel like the Rudy Gobert deal makes complete sense. I know, like, we're stunned by the volume of picks, and we're trying to figure out the Rudy Gobert, Karl Anthony Towns pairing. But as a whole, that was the player that Minnesota felt like they could go get that would take them over the top to where they're not struggling at the beginning of next season. Like, I made the argument, it wouldn't surprise me if Minnesota was this upcoming season was what Memphis was last year, where they're a team that just, hits that gear and are like, oh, okay, we see why they did this. Like, this makes sense. And they didn't have to give up, they were willing to part with a lot of their future. And they're, you're really rolling the dice on this working. But the key to it was they didn't have to give up a huge crop of like their current talent. Like talking about trading Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart. That's difficult for me. You talk about trading Jaylen Brown or Marcus Smart. Okay, that's different. You fill the rest out after that. But trading them both, to me, that doesn't work. With the way the Minnesota Timberwolves constructed their deal for Rudy Gobert, I thought it made perfect sense. Whether you agree with the deal or not, the actual, like in terms of Rudy Gobert and that fit, the actual deal in Minnesota thinking like, yo, this is going to be what puts us over the top, to me, it makes complete sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's why dealing with the Brooklyn Nets, who are still hanging on like to some imaginary, idea that they're still going to be in the running. I mean, that's why dealing with them versus dealing with the Utah Jazz, who look like they're headed towards Florida Marlins, blow it up, give everybody away type deal. And again, like you talked about it with the Gobert deal where, they didn't give up like all of these rotational players, but I would make the argument that they did. That they gave up the heart and the soul of their team in Patrick Beverley, that they gave up Beasley, who averaged 20 a game like 2 years earlier and is still young. Like they gave up Vanderbilt. They gave up so many pieces that is Gobert going to be able to make up for those pieces that they're missing? And I'm not sure the answer to that is yes, because it's not like the Utah Jazz went out and won a bunch of championships with Gobert. I mean, he can't defend the perimeter at all. Sure, he's a good defender at the rim, a great defender at the rim. He's great in the pick and roll, but I mean, they're banking that it will work with Karl Anthony Towns. And I wouldn't have made that bet that's the guy that changes everything.
I think the thing that they're banking on is, because you talked about the heart and soul of the team, I think the heart and soul of the team is Anthony Edwards. And I think they're banking on him taking that next ascension, because if there is a superstar on the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's Anthony Edwards. If there's a player who has the capability of getting into that penthouse that we talk about with LeBron and Steph and Giannis and Jokic and that group and Kevin Durant, it's Anthony Edwards. It's not Karl Anthony Towns. It sure as hell isn't Rudy Gobert. They're banking on Anthony Edwards being their next Kevin Garnett level superstar, in my opinion.
Oh no, I totally agree with that, but that doesn't mean that the tandem of Gobert and Cat can't get in the way of that. I mean, you're talking about like gumming up everything. Like Cat has to be an elite 3-point shooter, and they think he's the best 3-point shooting big in the game. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. But at the same point, like he has to be on the perimeter shooting. And is that the most effective way to use him all the time? I just see that there's going to be some issues there. And, you know, you still have D'Angelo Russell. There's question marks there, too. Like that team, like they're not a surefire 4 seed or a 3 seed. They could be a 2 seed. They could also be a train wreck just because it doesn't work. And so I like that they took a gamble. I just, for me, that wouldn't be have been the gamble that I would have made.
Maybe they didn't feel like there was another one. I mean, what
You know,
I don't know. Maybe they inquired about Donovan. Maybe that didn't work. Maybe Donovan doesn't fit them. I don't know. But they're trying, and I can see Minnesota. I can see the returns being there for Minnesota. Just the thing is, like, it's similar to Philadelphia. I wouldn't be shocked if the 76ers were the top seed in the team in the Eastern Conference next year. It's just I'm not going to believe it in the postseason. Just I'm not going to believe in James Harden's performance in the offseason, and I'm not going to believe in Rudy Gobert's ability in the postseason either until I actually see it.
yeah, I think I saw a picture of him standing with a lady yesterday, the day before, and he looked really slim as far as James Harden.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that picture. I mean, in a world of Instagram filters, I mean, I believe in that picture about as much as I believe in the Philadelphia 76ers making it all the way to the end of the NBA Finals. Like, I'm just not convinced either. That doesn't mean that they're not good and they're not fun to watch, but like that team has a lot of hurdles to get over, and that's if Embiid can hold up.
I think they'll be good. I just don't believe in like I think they'll be great. They could be the top seed in the East. I just don't think. I don't have any reason to think there'll be anything much more than that. I'd be much more likely to buy into Miami in the postseason against Philadelphia. I'd be much more likely to buy into Boston or even Milwaukee in the postseason. Like they're going to have to. They've never even where that Kawhi shot that wasn't even in the conference finals, was it? That was in the conference semis. So they've never the Philadelphia. I don't think's ever been to the conference finals.
You might be right. I don't know.
Still one of my favorite shots ever, whether it's conference or semis. That was the Kawhi Leonard Toronto shot's one of my favorites ever.
The big bounce, right?
Oh yeah. The bounce, the pause, the quiet arena. Oh, that was money. That's a sports moment.
Those are fun sports moments, like being at the Tyreek Evans shot. That was a sports moment.
Smidge bit more meaningful. Kawhi's
of course, yes.
Smidge bit more meaningful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would. I wasn't at the Tyreek game. That would have been dope. Yeah, that would have been dope for sure. We'll come back. We'll talk more basketball with James Ham. We'll talk more Kings with James Ham when we return to Steeler and KC. Brought to you by McQueen and the Violet Fog, the smoothest gin in the world, handcrafted in Brazil, here on ESPN 1320. Clear. Sacramento was last past the second round in 2002. Well,
Philly
for that.
Philly was.
No, it says Sacramento.
Oh. Yeah.
That's hurtful.
Yeah. Well, the next year Weber blew his knee in the playoffs. In the second round, right? No. Yeah, it was. I'm almost positive it was the second round.
Or Dallas. Was it Dallas?
It was Dallas. Yeah. It was in Dallas.
No, I didn't mean the Philadelphia 76ers ever. I meant Philadelphia's they've won a championship. I meant the process.
Yeah. The process. You know, it's tough though because like look, we went through an era where some of the greatest players to ever play the game never won a championship because you had Michael Jordan win 6 out of 8 and the only 2 he lost was because he took off. So then we get to another era where the Golden State Warriors and Cleveland Cavaliers, basically like the most boring stretch of 4 or 5 years in a row, where they're playing in the finals every single year, and there's only two teams representing the entire league in the NBA finals for like a 5 year window. That's brutal too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, getting past LeBron has never been easy until now when,
Until he came out west,
yeah, he learned the hard way, right?
I
The,
guess.
the West is
Yeah,
tough.
I guess. Steph's like, this is my territory, buddy.
Yeah. I spent all day writing a defensive piece on on the Kings. Like, how do they improve defensively? So
Well,
it's
I didn't get an email, so you haven't posted it yet?
no, I haven't posted it yet. It'll go up as soon as we're done here. Like I think the wife will be editing soon. So
Very good.
it's long, like the key to the Kings defense is like four dudes. I'm not even putting Sabonis in there. Sabonis, he is what he is, but the other guys that are around they got to be good. Eduardo Nahara.
Raptors. Oh, that's right. They played the Bucks in the conference finals that season.
Oh yeah, so that was the second round, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, the high bounce. Yeah, that was crazy.
Game 7. Oh man.
Like this is a question. I am the Bay. Mike Brown can only run the defense his personnel will allow him to. I don't know if that's the case, to be honest with you, because I look at the Warriors and sure they have Draymond Green and Looney is a really good defender, and then they have Wiggins. But outside of that, and they had Gary Payton, but again, that was sort of like found money. Like they were able to do some things there that didn't make any sense. Like how do you? Depends on where you look, like whether they're rated number one or number two. But like defensive rating wise, they finished first in the league with Steph Curry and Poole and Bielitsa played minutes all season long. Otto Porter is decent, but again, aging legs and wasn't nearly as effective as he was as a young player. Klay Thompson missed half the season, and then when not half, but close, but he was coming off missing like almost 3 years of basketball. Draymond did miss half the season. So yes, I believe that Mike Brown's defensive scheming had a lot to do with the fact that they were the best defensive team in the league. Now, whether he
Coming
can do
back.
that in Sacramento,
We'll stay with defense. You got to rush over to your computers, your laptops, pull out your smartphone, go to thekingsbeat.com and become a subscriber of the Kings Beat newsletter, because shortly after we wrap up, James's latest, apparently very long form article on the Sacramento Kings will drop. And if you're a Kings fan, you need to be subscribing to the Kings Beat, man. That's where it's at. And if you're really a Kings fan, you need to be a premium subscriber over at the Kings Beat. But we got into a discussion about defense. Apparently, this is the focal point of your next article. You want to give us a little sneak peek as to what we can read here coming up around 4:00?
yeah, I mean, the fact that the Kings were the worst, second, third worst, whatever you want to put them, one of the worst defensive teams, not only last year but the season before. And then they went on and they had an offseason where they didn't really add defensive players. It really, to me, it hinges upon this season's success. Mike Brown can do wonders, but how much can he do with a team that was atrocious on the defensive end? And it comes down to four players for me, and it's De'Aaron Fox, Harrison Barnes, Rashawn Holmes, and Davion Mitchell. And those are the four guys. Because, like, look, you can make defensive improvements at the end of your bench. And, we see, like, KZ Okpala and Chima Maneki. Like, that's fine. But are those guys going to play? And if they're not going to play, then they can't impact the defense. Just like Keon Ellis can't impact the defense this season because he's going to have a hard time getting on the court. So if you look at the numbers and really dive into the why, I'm confused why Harrison Barnes had such a bad defensive year. He's never been a bad defensive player. He ranked right around the middle of the pack in the NBA for a long time, and last year just seems like an anomaly. So can having Mike Brown and having somewhat better defensive players help Harrison Barnes fix his defensive woes? I just don't buy that at age 30. I know Harrison. I know how much he takes care of his body. There's just no way that he just is declining yet, to a point where he would be like, I mean, some of the defensive rating stuff was horrible, like bottom 12% though of the league. And, as far as like pick and roll covering the man, you're talking about like it was either that or it was closing out on shooters. He's like bottom 5% in the league. I mean, just these numbers are startling. And you watch some of the footage, and some of it backs it up, but it felt like he was chasing his tail a lot of last year, and some of that is because we're looking at guys that can't seem to help him at all. Tyrese Halliburton was a lot of things. He wasn't a defensive player. Buddy Hield, in a man-on situation isn't horrible, but as a team defender was just always bad. But if you can get Rashawn Holmes on the court and back to some point where he was in previous seasons, you might be able to improve this defense. And if De'Aaron Fox, Will Z put up the stats earlier that I was talking about, but against what the top 30 scorers in the league, Fox went up against 23 of them, and he held his own. He was like second best holding at field goal percentage against the best scorers in the league. But you can't get torched by TJ McConnell. That's not okay.
Yeah.
And so if he can figure out that issue, then the Kings will be better. And then I think the reason I add Davion in is that if Fox doesn't figure it out, or if Malik Monk or Herter or Terrence Davis doesn't figure it out, like Davion Mitchell's going to steal your minutes. He's going to steal all your minutes because he is good. He is good defensively, and he's a guy that, like look at what Gary Payton did last season for Golden State. Like he stole a bunch of minutes, and he had no business being out there, and he made a bunch of money off of it, but he had no business being out there. The fact is that he played harder than everybody else, and he played more focused on the defensive end. So if Fox takes a step back or doesn't take a step forward defensively, like there will be times when maybe he's not in the closing lineup. Like if you can't hold your own defensively, Mike Brown's not going to play you. And that's something that this group needs to learn very quickly.
This message caught your attention during the commercial break as well from I Am the Bay. It says Mike Brown can only run the defense his personnel will allow him to. And I felt like we came back to the radio show when you were discussing this, but like you disagree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I mean Mike Brown can do more than that. Like there are situations where you can't coach around defensive players that are so bad, and you can't have an accumulation of just horrific defenders. Like if your whole team is horrific, there's very little Mike Brown can do to hide. But A, he can pull more out of guys. And B, he can scheme his way around a few things. And I mean, we saw it in the playoffs, right? Like part of the time that Luka Doncic got just completely destroyed on the defensive end, that's the Golden State Warriors and Mike Brown coaching to that, finding Luka on every single possession and just eating him alive. Like on the, trying to work around someone else's defense. Now, like when it comes to the Kings, like I don't expect Mike Brown to put up the 10th best defensive rating in the league, and maybe even like getting out of the bottom 10 will be difficult, but they will be better because his principles, his understanding, his modern understanding. I mean, he won a championship last year as a defensive coach for a team that lacked a lot of defensive players. Did they have defensive players? Yes. Looney is a good defender. Draymond Green is an outstanding, great defender, but number one, he's aging, and number two, he only played 44 games, and they still had the best regular season defensive rating. Wiggins stepped up and became a much better defender, and Peyton stepped up and became a better defender. But Nemanja Bjelica was on that team. Klay Thompson not playing for 900 and something days was on that team. Steph Curry was on that team. And while I think that's what I look at with Fox. Like, Steph has improved to a point where he's a league average, maybe a little bit better defender. Can you get De'Aaron Fox with his skill set to be a better defender? Sure. Like, there's some things that in this situation with Fox come down to scheme. There's something that come down to effort. There's some things that come down to like scouting reports or understanding. But I think Mike Brown can clear up a lot of that stuff and make him a better defender. Specifically, like in the pick and roll, Fox in the man-on situation, as the dribbler eats him alive for some reason. That's where he's at his worst. And he's got to figure that out. He's got to figure out how to get through. But some of that time, it really does depend on the big man you're playing with and whether they're working too. So, yeah, I definitely think that there's a possibility that he can change some of the culture and everything else about this team.
Well, what do you? So is his biggest hangup the scheme, or is his biggest hangup effort, or does it vary on a night to night basis?
Well, like, here's what I would say about Fox, and I feel like so many times I come off as like I'm apologizing for him, but like during the Luke Walton era, he had three different defensive coordinators. The year before that, he had a different defensive coordinator. So the last 4 years, he's had four different defensive coordinators. Each of them wants something different. Each of them asks something different. And then on top of that, he hasn't had defensive players around him at all. Like his backcourt mate is usually a horrific defender. And if you're trying to help and like, again, if you're De'Aaron Fox and you know how much you mean to them on the offensive end, and you still have to defend the toughest guy every single night on the perimeter, that's not good. And so having a guy like Herter that can take on some of those tough covers, that's switchable, that's bigger, that will help. Having a guy like Davion who can step on the court and take on a tougher defender and let you move off the ball a little bit off of the point of attack, that's fine. So I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's scheme. I think it's situational. But those excuses in year 6 have to go out the window, and it's got to be about him just being better. And he knows that. He knows he's got to be better defensively.
I think there's probably a lot of things that go into play. There are a lot of things that kind of get mixed together, but I think the schemes and the coaches constantly changing, and guys telling you to do one thing and then the next year telling you to do another, and then the next year telling you to do another. I think that could often contribute to the lack of effort, because at some point we knew this. You ain't going to be here in 20 games anyways. So let me just try to preserve as much energy as I can on this end and try to get cooking on the offensive end, because ultimately we're going to need to score points.
Yeah, and I know, like in pick and roll coverage, a lot of times the pick and roll guy that you're in the coverage with is your power forward, right? Well, look at the power forwards he's played with. I mean, that's a big deal. Like Keegan Murray, if he can be league average, the Kings will be maybe 3 spots higher than they are defensive-wise, rating-wise, because, I mean, go back the last couple of years. I mean, Nemanja Bjelica, Marvin Bagley. Like, how are these guys going to help you stop? Even, again, like Chimezie Metu got plenty of opportunity last year. He played a lot of minutes. But he's, like, his defensive metrics aren't great, especially in the pick and roll. So, you got to figure out ways to like kind of spread the blame a little bit. It's not one guy who lacks effort. The problem that you have is when he shows he can do it against elite guys and then doesn't show that he can do it against guys who aren't elite, then that's when you start to like shake your head and go, okay, we have more issues than just a coach or just, like focus night in, night out. Like there are bigger issues, and those need to be solved. And those videos, the tape of those games has to be gone over. And, like, you need to explain to me how it is that TJ McConnell ended up at the basket, like, 7 times in a row. Like, explain it. And if you can't, then, like, I'm going to have to show, like, because Davion will explain it. He'll explain what you did wrong. And that's what I mean. At a certain point, like if you want to be in a closing lineup, you want to play 36 minutes a night, you want to be the guy, you got to show it on both ends, and you got to prove that, I mean, you can get this team over the hump.
This team's identity is going to be on the offensive end, isn't it?
Well, it should be, but I think what they'll be on the offensive end is a lot of fun. And then on the defensive end, they're going to quietly make improvements throughout the season. And I'll also say this too, like we brought this up a little bit, but when you have a refined offense that's efficient, not this wild shooting 37 to 43 pointers a night and having, 9 of them or 11 of them go down. At the NBA level, if you can't put the ball in the basket, then your defense is going to be bad. Because transition at the NBA level is nuts, especially this year where you can't even foul a guy mid-court in transition. You're going to get that weird take foul. But my point is that if every single time it's a rebound and a ball shooting out and the opposition is running to the other end to go get a bucket, it's really hard to set up your defense and actually get a stop. If you can be efficient on the offensive end, force the opponent to take the ball out of the basket after a made shot, your defensive numbers will improve dramatically. And that's where I think, again, we're going to see a lot of improvement. And that's where I think that Domantas Sabonis means so much overall to this team, because he's going to be a guy that isn't okay with hoisting shots at 22 seconds left in the shot clock and ill-advised 26-foot three. That stuff just isn't going to fly. This is going to be a more well-oiled machine. And also add in the fact that you got one of the most elite rebounders in the game, so you are actually going to improve on that end as well, closing out defensive possessions. That's a good thing.
Could he be the best player on the Kings this season?
Sabonis?
Yeah.
Yeah, without any question. I mean, he might already be the best player. We don't know. Like, statistically speaking, he won't score the most, but that doesn't mean you're not the best player.
Even scoring-wise, he's not that far off of what De'Aaron was last year.
Oh, 5 points. That's a sizable jump.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a sizable. I mean, like, at his best, I think Sabonis, I would like to see him hit the 20-point mark, but I also don't think it's imperative that he hits a 20-point mark. He needs to hit 18 points, be between 16 and 22 every single night, which is something that I kind of think that you will get. You're getting a guy that you can write things in and pin. He will dominate the glass. There are very few games where he didn't dominate the glass last season when he moved to the Kings, and even in those games, the Kings almost always won the rebound battle because he cleared out everybody and other people were getting rebounds. So there's a lot to like about what he brings overall. And again, we talked about this on the podcast last week. There's something to having a moment in a game where a team gets a 6-0 run. Sometimes it gets up to 8-0. And the teams that are even decent, they're able to snap those streaks right then. They're able to make a good offensive play and get a bucket and end a streak for the opponent. The Kings haven't had that player since Zebo. You have to have that player that can stop a run, that understands the gravity of the situation, knows what's happening, senses a momentum switch, and then gets in the post, calls for the ball, and either gets an easy bucket for himself or an easy bucket for his teammates. Sabonis is that guy. You will not see the big, crazy back and forth runs. Like, will there be runs? Yeah, basketball is a game of runs, but the Kings don't have that typical guy that you feed. If you got an 11-0 run being hit against you, the last thing you can do is shoot a 3-point shot. You have got to get to the basket, and that's something that the Kings have missed. That ability to stop everything and reset everything and get back on defense. Again, when you miss another shot, it's transition again, and those things snowball.
How much of that do you think is a player versus a mentality? And I guess in this case, it's probably a collective mentality of that's how we have to end this run that they're on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you're going to have players that have that built into them, but you also, like in Sacramento specifically, you have the "oh no, here we go" moment. in every game. And to be honest, so it's almost always in the third quarter. Like you get into the third quarter and the other team makes an adjustment and you don't. You punched in the face and staggered, and then you let go of the rope and the thing spins out. Like that's where you need the guy that says, "Okay, I got you. I can go get you a bucket." And I'll calm this thing down and we'll get back on defense and we'll get a stop and we'll start to build back the other way. You do have to have that mentality, but it's almost like that's part of the culture of Sacramento. Oh, great, it's the third quarter. We're about to get handled. Or it's 3 minutes into the third and we got a 8-point lead and we know this isn't going to hold up. That's kind of where this team has gone for like, I don't know, last 10 years. Not just last season or the season before. There's always that moment. So having specific players that understand that moment, but I think players can learn that as well. And it's just like having a player like Fox who understands that he has to reserve something for the fourth quarter and take over in the fourth. Like that's kind of what the Kings need in the third and in the second. They need these other components that I hope that they have. They've done a good job of adding some pieces. So I think that there could be some positive momentum in that way this year.
I feel like the way you just laid out those oh no moments in a game is how we were laying out those oh no moments for a season earlier. We were talking about, oh no, this is the part of the season where everything falls apart. We have to stop it. We're talking about the microcosm. We got to get a basket and stop this run. We've got to stop this losing streak and get a win here before this thing spirals out of control. And it was something, we were talking about this earlier, how imperative I think it is for the Kings, for De'Aaron Fox to get off to a good start, or to get off to at least a solid start where you don't get that, oh no, here we go again moment, or that, oh no, this is all slipping away moment. Because, you trace it back to last year, it is ridiculously early in the season that the entire thing fell apart.
Well, it usually does. Like how many times have I covered a team? Westfall made it 7 games into a season. Michael Malone was 23 games. Dave Yeager, they expected to fire him after 20. Luke Walton was 17. Like it's almost by design that these things happen, the oh no moments and that's why I always say, like, if you can avoid chaos, and I think having a coach that's going to be here, that's one way to avoid chaos. Making your trades now as opposed to having a potential blockbuster deal that may or may not happen at any time between the months of October and February 1. That's not conducive to winning. Everyone in the entire locker room looking over their shoulder the whole time, wondering if their name is going to be thrown up on Twitter by somebody at any moment, and then they're on their way out the door. Those things aren't. That's not how you build a positive culture. Players get traded, things happen. Get it done early as possible so it can get out of the way. But this team also, they haven't even truly got to a moment late in the season where the real playoff teams show up and the pretenders fade, and the other teams really like the playoffs is not when basketball gets hard. It gets hard with about 15 or 20 games left in the season where certain teams start gearing up. Certain teams that have been there before. It's why San Antonio just kept making the playoffs. They knew how to finish a season. Well, the Kings don't know that. They don't know how to do it because they haven't done it in so long. And so that's going to be one of those things they have to learn. So it should be an interesting season. I like where they're heading. And I think there are questions about, like, how far can your elite pairing of Domantas Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox carry you. But I'm willing to like give them a fresh start and say, I think that they're really talented and they could carry you further than some other duos that are in the league. And a lot of it will come down to that.
I think that's a sneaky key phrase that we haven't really used before. I think people's perspective on the Kings could really boil down to whether or not you're willing to give them a fresh start or not. Whether or not you're willing to eliminate your frustrations with Vlade and his draft picks and the way Pete D'Alessandro ran things, or the way that the Maloofs ran things, or the Keith Smart era of coaching, or the this era, that era. If you're willing to put all of that stuff aside and give this team a fresh start and look at it, even if you don't want to erase everything, and just look at it in the kind of microcosm of the Monte McNair era, I think you'll look at this team a little bit differently if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, and as someone who's covered this team forever, it's really hard to do that all the time. And
Sure.
I'll be honest, I was super harsh on Monty and Wes and the way that draft night went. I was harsh on him. Like even I love the Keegan Murray addition, and I always have these, but and same thing with Herter. I think that was a wonderful addition. I think getting Malik Monk in free agency, but there comes a point where the team is done and whatever has happened. And as a writer, you just move on. You're like, okay, well, this is where we're going now. Like, would I have made all these moves that they did? No, probably not. But would I have even done them in the way that they did it? No. But then that's just my opinion. And then once we get to a certain point, it's like, okay, this is where we open the season. This is the group that we move into the season with, and I have to be fair and honest and give them a 0-0 record. And that's what you do every time. I walk into every night thinking, okay, this could be ugly, but hey, who knows? You can't be 240 games under 500 and not have a positive outlook, over 12 seasons of covering a team. You just walk in, and every day is a new day that you're watching professional basketball and enjoying the fact that you get to do it for a living.
Yeah, there could be worse things to do, that's for sure. Head over to thekingsbeat.com right now. James is dropping his new article here in just moments. And now that I have stopped monopolizing James Ham's time, he can get back to the Kings Beat podcast and the Kings Beat newsletter as well. So again, head over to thekingsbeat.com, become a subscriber over there. If you missed any part of today's show, search D'Lo and KC on your favorite podcast platform, whether it's Apple, Spotify, Google Play, or here on the Odyssey app.